Welcome to the Digital in Physio podcast. Today, we have Dr. Micheal Rowe, who is an academic and researcher working on technology enhanced learning and teaching, artificial intelligence, and higher professional education. He's the Associate Professor for Digital Innovation in the School of Health and Social Care at the University of Lincoln. Dr. Micheal is also a blogger. He has a newsletter and a podcast, two podcasts, if I'm not mistaken. And he's recently released a new course on AI with Physiopedia. And I'm so glad to have him today in order to speak more about AI and physiotherapy and the future of the profession. So, welcome, Dr. Micheal. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
I'm so glad we got to talk. And so, I want to start as in the same way we started offline. So, I wanted to talk to you because every time I was searching for AI in physiotherapy, your article would pop in the search. It was like cited many times and shared by many people. And it caused some controversy because the title was How to Replace a Physiotherapist. What was that article about? And do you still hold the same beliefs?
Yeah. So I think we started writing that paper. I wrote it with co-authors Jay Shaw and Dave Nichols. We started thinking about the paper in about 2018 and started writing 2019 and eventually published in 2020. And the idea was that we were seeing an encroachment of technology into areas of physiotherapy practice that we would traditionally regard as being core. So things like clinical reasoning, observation, the kinds of things that we would say to our students, these things are really important. And so if I use a simple example of something like observation of gait and the analysis of someone's walking pattern, that's something that we spend a lot of time teaching our students how to do. Actually, I'm not sure if we still do that, but back when I was a student, that was observation was something that was quite important. And what we were seeing at the time was computer vision was really making significant strides. And we were able to identify individuals by their gait pattern just with computer analysis, looking at a video of them walking. And so we started saying, well, what happens if there's other areas of physiotherapy practice that are going to be taken over by technology? And so the paper was about saying, here are some of the areas of practice that we think are core, that physiotherapists, I guess, the profession would think to be core. And then we looked for technology that was making a dent in those areas. And so this was something that we published in 2020, and things have only progressed since then. And the point of the paper was to try to say that physiotherapy is not really one single thing. It's a collection of tasks. And there seems to be some areas of practice where those tasks are starting to be done better by machines. And what does it look like when your profession starts to, I don't want to say taken over. I really don't like this framing of technology as us against it. Um, and so, but what happens when we start seeing that some of the tasks that we regard as being core can be done better by machines? Do we build up a wall around the profession and try to resist the technology? Or do we embrace the technology? Do we hand over some of those tasks to machines? And then what are the other kinds of tasks that we might want to look at bringing into the profession? So I think the point of the article was really just to start a conversation, and the title, obviously, it was a controversial title, but the point was to try and start having a conversation with the profession to say, look, there are areas of practice that technology is making inroads in. What are we going to do about that? How are we going to respond?
Yeah, okay. So, you released this article around 2020, 2021. ChatGPT was gone full force. It was the first like shock of like big and general AI in the world. It was like brought to life like around November 2022. So the AI has been like doing strides, even though we are still having like maybe healthcare is the least adaptive. So we have AI in healthcare, but we're not having it like open source like with everything else. So clearly there is a redistribution of responsibilities everywhere. And so that brings me to the point of, since now we know that where AI is heading, we know AI is a fact, it's here, we are using it in our daily lives. So what do you think is the gap in teaching, since you are that's your core specialty. And as you said, like it varies in the same country, like universities are teaching different things. So what's the current gap? Like, what is, in your vision, good AI education, or like instilling AI in the education? How should universities start doing that to prepare the future generation of physiotherapists that will likely work along AI? What should they
Yeah.
do?
So, I mean, I don't want to tell anybody what they should do. So I'll start off by saying what I think I'm going
Yeah,
to do.
sure.
Um, so I think we need to be careful because we need to acknowledge that there are still problems with generative AI. We also need to recognize that generative AI is only a small part of the whole AI ecosystem. There's lots of other AI systems like expert systems, planning, computer vision, like those are all areas of study that have got nothing to do with generative AI. So generative AI just happens to be the area that everyone's paying attention to at the moment. So I think when we look at the field in its totality, I think that there's a lot more cause for optimism and hope. I think there are a lot of concerns around generative AI, and for good reason. It does hallucinate, it does make things up, it is biased. And so all of my optimism around generative AI shouldn't take away from the fact that there are still things that we need to be careful of. But having said that, there are lots of other areas of AI there where people are making good progress that isn't really covered in any of the conversation around generative AI. So to come back to your question, how might people consider using it in higher and professional education? Maybe I'll take a step back and first, maybe respond to some of the concerns that people have where they are reacting to generative AI in a way that says, well, there are some things that AI is not going to be able to do. And so we'll protect those areas and we'll call those human. These are the responsibilities that humans have. And then AI can do the other things that we don't mind handing off to AI. And the problem with that is that every time ChatGPT or Anthropic releases a new model, that model has increased in capability. And so the number of things that it can't do is dramatically decreasing. So every time a new model comes out, then the generative capabilities of the models have expanded significantly. And the problem with walling off areas of practice for human beings only based on what AI can and can't do, it means that every time a new model comes out, that area of practice gets smaller and smaller. And so in higher education, in professional education, even in practice, I worry that people are painting themselves into smaller and smaller corners by looking at the capabilities of AI and then saying, okay, well, we'll take what's left. And the problem is that what's left is an area that's getting smaller and smaller. So what I instead suggest to people is that we use AI as a springboard to accelerate and enhance all of our capabilities. So I really do think that a physiotherapist, a lecturer, an engineer, a lawyer, any profession, I think you can be better. You can better. That's a very kind of loaded word. So for whatever kind of definition of better you want to insert, think about that. But we can be quicker, faster, cheaper, more productive, more kind, more sensitive, if we use AI. And I know that some people listening to that are just they're horrified by the fact that I've said that. But I don't think it's unreasonable to say, I'm this kind of a person, so you need a little bit of self-awareness. I'm this kind of person. I'd like to be better. I'd like to be a better husband, father, physiotherapist, better citizen, all these kinds of things that I'd like to improve in my life. I think that there's a role for AI to play in that. Now, you could say, well, it's better for us to have human relationships. It's better for us to work more closely with other people. But sometimes we don't have that luxury. There are many people in the world who don't have access to somebody who can help them be a better therapist. Maybe they don't have clinical expertise in their area. Maybe they're the only physiotherapist in that part of, the world, the region, whatever. And so I think it's a luxury to be able to say, well, humans should provide that service. Humans should fill that gap. Some people don't have that luxury. And so providing AI support to those kinds of people who might want to improve their practice or improve their citizenship or improve the way that they behave in certain ways, I think that AI can play a role in that. And so for any area of practice where you look at your performance, and again, I use that word hesitatingly, reluctantly, because I know that some people will not want to think of their kind of citizenship as a performance. But if we look at any area of life that we want to improve in, and we look at AI not as a competition or not as a threat, rather as something that could support our progression and improvement in all areas of life, then we should actually be very optimistic and positive every time a new model comes out that's more capable, because it means it's able to give us a better springboard. It's able to help us to be better in the ways that we might want to improve. So rather than competing with AI for increasingly smaller areas of practice, we use AI to expand and improve all areas of practice. So whether we're talking about clinical practice or whether we're talking about being a teacher or being a student, I think that every time a model comes out that's more capable, rather than seeing it as a bigger threat to some of the tasks that I want to do, I try to think, how do I incorporate AI into all of my tasks? So it's never about me being in competition with AI. It's always about how am I working together with AI to improve across all of the areas that I care about.
Yeah, that's great. Can you can you give me an example, like you as an educator or a researcher, how do you use AI for your daily job, for your daily task?
Okay, so a lot of the work that I do is around trying to support people across the school in various aspects of their practice. So they want to experiment with some teaching approach, or they want to experiment with some kind of different assessment. So what I might do is take that context. So I described to AI, I said, this is my job, this is my role. In this particular situation, I'm trying to help this person achieve this objective. These are the resources that we have available to us. This is the number of students. These are the learning outcomes we want to achieve. We don't have a lot of resource, we don't have a lot of money, we don't have a lot of space. So I can set out the conditions that this assessment needs to satisfy. And then I can go to, I use Claude as my kind of language model of choice, but you can do the same thing with ChatGPT or Gemini. Perplexity is another one that's very good. And so you give it all of this context. You describe your working context. You explain your resources. You could upload papers and say, here are 5 research papers that I found on this topic that I really like. I want you to use all of this context in your response to me. I want you to give me a set of learning activities that we might want to consider in this particular context. Um, and so then it responds to me and it gives me 5 different things, and I say, okay, I like item 1 and item 3. Those are the ones that seem really good to me. Tell me more about each one of those. Give me the pros, the cons. Give me some estimates around what it will cost to run those. And then I can take that information and I can go back to my colleagues in the physiotherapy department or in the OT department or speech and language, and we can sit down and we can say, here are 3 options that you might want to consider. Let's talk about this. Let's go through this in your context. Might this work? What are the barriers to putting this into place? How can I support you in implementing this in the classroom? And so that allows me to spend more time interacting with my colleagues and supporting them. And I'm not spending all my time reading papers about teaching methods that maybe I'm not familiar with, to try and give them ideas to kind of support something that they might want to do. So it's about trying to use AI to come up with ideas to support my thinking, to be critical of some of my thoughts. I use it often to say, here's a piece of writing that I want to put out as a blog post or a newsletter in the school, or this is something that I want to promote. Give me reasons why this is a bad idea. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me what my blind spots are. Tell me what assumptions I'm making. Um, so as much as possible, I'm trying to bounce ideas off AI to make what I'm going to produce better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So it's more like a thinking partner and not an like end to all communication. This is a part of what I see students do now. So, like, people were stunned by the ability of ChatGPT or Claude or all generative AI. So, the moment you hit enter, you get like a 300 page, 300 word response. So, people were like, oh, that's magnificent. And so, I ask something, I take that, I go and use it. So I know that students are using this in their research reports, in their assignments to prepare for exams. They could be cheating using ChatGPT. And so universities and educators are freaking out. Like, and even students are like, okay, so I have like all this material and I can take it and like ChatGPT will summarize it in few sentences or few questions, or give me a huge response for a research report that I'm doing. And so that's my point, where like, where's the responsibility of universities today in teaching students how to use AI instead of freaking out about AI? So
Yeah. So I think there's freaking out on both sides. There's lecturers
yeah,
obviously worried about students cheating, and then there's students also just trying to deal with this and trying to understand, how can I use it? When can I use it? When is it okay? When is it unethical? I think most students don't want to cheat. I think most students want to learn. They want to do their best work. Um, but for lots of reasons, people maybe want to take shortcuts. And I think we need to try and set up the university environment so that they are less likely to want to take those shortcuts. I think one of the biggest problems we've introduced into higher education is that we've put a premium on content production as an important proxy for students' learning. So we say to the student, you write a 2,000-word essay, and that proves to me that you know something about the topic. And now that we have a content producing machine that can write all of these essays for students, in universities, we don't know how to respond. And I think it's because we've lost our sense of imagination around what other things we might be able to do to help um, identify what students have learned. Something that doesn't rely on content production. So any assessment task that relies on your ability to produce content, I think those assessment tasks we might as well throw away, because not only can students use generative AI to complete those assessments, but increasingly we're unable to identify when they've used generative AI. So I do think that there are some concerns around that. I would rather say, let students use AI for everything, but then let's change the assessment task. So rather than asking students to write an essay, let's start ask students to build companies, or to build websites, or to build services in their communities, build mobile apps. There are a lot of things that we can do when we recognize that AI can elevate performance across all aspects of your curriculum. And so if the student is now able to perform at a much higher level, well, our assessment tasks should then be adapted to assess their performance at that higher level. So rather than expecting students to write essays, we should expect them to do more. Maybe we should expect them to make a real impact in the world. Maybe they should be doing real research where we're not evaluating their research proposals or their thesis. Maybe we should be evaluating the impact of their assessment on their communities. So I think that there are different ways that we can start thinking about what higher education, what research might look like if we just say to students, look, there are no rules around what you can use the AI for. Use it for whatever you want. But then we need to have a look at what the products that they create are worth to society. So it's a big question. How do we prepare students for generative AI? How do we prepare lecturers? How do we prepare clinicians? I think these are all open-ended questions that nobody has the answer to. For myself, I've started experimenting with this idea of taste, developing a sense of taste around using generative AI. There are no instructions that come with generative AI. So you don't get an instruction manual like you get with Outlook or Word that tells you exactly how to use it to achieve certain outcomes. You have to sit down and experiment with it. You have to see which ones write in a tone that you like. So your choice of a language model is going to be determined to a large extent on how it interacts with you. I don't like the way ChatGPT interacts with me. My preference is for Claude. But other people don't like the way Claude works. So that comes down to a question of taste. It's about subjective experience. It's about personal preference. And those are hard things to train and develop in people. We can't just run a series of workshops for all of our students and expect them to leave the workshop now with an understanding of how AI works. We have to say to them that they have kind of an open-ended project that they can complete, and they need to use AI to complete as much of the project as possible. And that allows them to develop their sense of taste. So I think that this is a difficult problem, and we definitely don't have time to kind of cover all the different ways that we might want to think about developing AI literacy, but it absolutely has to be something that is integrated across everything we do in the university and to some extent in clinical practice. It's not going to work if we just introduce a module into the physiotherapy curriculum that's called, technical literacy, AI literacy, that's not going to work.
So it's more into like practice more than it is like theory and um, like just talking about AI. So here's the thing: like currently, there are certain trainings where you can train your own bot. So it's like your own ChatGPT, your own AI bot. And so anyone can create, like as you were saying, like students can also go and create an AI bot for themselves to use it. So my question here is, I understand the point of like going more practical, but so let's think about it from another perspective. So the internet has been here for 50 years or more. I don't remember like during university, maybe it's like different across different universities, but I don't remember anyone giving a course on cybersecurity. So when I was in university, it was like the internet was here like 30 years ago or something. And still they told us to go and do research, but no one like said like, okay, those are couple of 18, 19 years old, like whatever happens on the internet, like we are responsible for that. And like now when I think about it, like cybersecurity should be, and we started figuring this out, we are giving this education for teens now, or even younger kids about the risks of the internet and how should they behave around the internet. And like even now we still don't have a comprehensive view of how cybersecurity should be taught in universities. And my guess is the same with AI. So when we are talking about medical AI settings, um, uh, we are we have those risks that like the things that you mentioned, like hallucinations, the bias, and all those stuff. So shouldn't students learn about that in university, like before they even go out in the world and play with AI?
Absolutely. But I want them to learn about that in the context of a project that they're doing on public health rather than on when they go out and work in practice and now they're starting to use it with patients. So, part of developing AI literacy will be giving students opportunities to use those tools in safe environments. So, if you're going to develop a project in a public health module and you're going to be using AI to build a public health campaign that advocates for some condition or something, and you're going to look at the impact of your public health campaign on that community, that's relatively low risk. You're going to be doing it in conjunction with your lecturer and maybe with your peers. And as part of that public health program, you're going to be getting insight into the biases and the limitations of generative AI. I'm not saying that we just give students the tools and say, good luck, I'll see you in 6 months. Every time we see them, we're going to say, what are the challenges that you experienced? How many of you identified problems in the feedback that you were getting from AI? How many of you identified hallucinations? Where did you see the bias? So all of those conversations are absolutely essential and critical to this development of AI literacy. So I'm saying that we absolutely should be including all of those concerns around security, data privacy, um, patient outcomes, exposing personally identifiable information in your prompts to language models. All of those should be a core parts of the curriculum everywhere that there's an AI component integrated. So I'm not suggesting that students should be left to their own devices. We are absolutely responsible for helping navigate that pathway through some of those challenges and those ethics concerns. Um, but I want to have them learn about those things in the context of an assessment task or a pathway, a learning program um, within the university, so that when they graduate, they have a sense of what is okay to do, what isn't okay to do, what parts of the kind of patient experience can we share with AI, what parts can't we share.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. So I think like an example would be like I don't think that there's any problem with saying to generative AI, um, I'm having a problem with this patient. I'm a physiotherapist. I work in the community in a community-based practice. I'm having this challenge with the patient. We're having some communication issues, and the patient doesn't seem to be willing to carry out any of the exercises that I'm giving to the patient, and they seem to be reluctant and blah blah blah. Give me some guidance on how I can interact with this person in a different way. The patient doesn't seem to be listening to me. What can I do to change my behavior to make my message a little bit more palatable for the patient? I think that's a perfectly reasonable conversation to have with a language model. And for a new graduate, someone who's less experienced, who maybe doesn't have access to expertise and mentorship, why shouldn't they have that conversation with the language model that's going to maybe give them some ideas about how to approach this patient in a different way? What I wouldn't do is upload the patient's medical history and say, tell me how to treat this patient. And I think that's what a lot of clinicians think that is going to happen with generative AI. You're going to upload the patient's electronic health record and say, tell me how to treat the patient. Now, obviously, no one is saying that that's appropriate or acceptable or legal. Um, I don't even think that a language model would be useful in giving you a response to that. So, as optimistic as I am about people using generative AI in all sorts of contexts, including clinical practice, I think that there are some very clear boundaries that we shouldn't be crossing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was reading your newsletter today on the cost of the real cost that we could be paying for AI models based on how much resources goes into those models. And I was also reading an article a few months ago about how much water is needed for the processors of ChatGPT, and it's started becoming a community concern in, I think, in California. So do you think, like, the way we put it now, and the way that I see it, I agree with this, it's more as democratizing education, leveling up a little bit the discrepancies between universities and like the access to resources that different students have. But what if at some point, like ChatGPT has an upgrade, Claude, I think also. So, like Claude gives you certain amount of prompts per time frame, and then you have to upgrade to get more. So, do you think it will democratize, or it will further increase the discrepancy in education between people, like in the future? What do you think about?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a few things that you've touched on there. There's the impact on climate change, which I think is, that's true. There's no denying it. Um, I think that there are other things that we should probably address first before we look at the impact of generative AI on climate change. Um, Industry, I think, is responsible for a far bigger percentage of a negative impact on climate change than generative AI. So it is something that is getting bigger and it is a concern, but maybe there are other things that are bigger concerns that we should address first. There's also some good arguments to be made that in the future, if these companies reach artificial general intelligence, which is what their stated objectives are, they're not building chatbots. They want to build something that is going to be generally intelligent across all human domains. If they get to that point, then there's a good argument to be made that machines will come up with a solution to climate change, like machines will come up with a solution to cancer and poverty. And, you can kind of, people definitely will be rolling their eyes when they hear that. But that is the stated objective of these companies. They want to solve these big problems. So maybe the solution is in the future to climate change, and maybe it's AI in the future that will solve climate change, even though it's AI at the moment that's making climate change a little bit worse. You also talked about the digital divide. I think absolutely this is going to increase the digital divide, just like the internet has been increasing it over the last 30 years. So there are concerns around that, and this is why a lot of people are calling for generative AI companies to make these models more freely available for everyone. And to be honest, I think these companies have really given away a lot for free. So Claude does have a daily limit, as does Perplexity, on the number of tokens you can exchange. So just for anyone listening, a token, you can just think of a token as a piece of a word. And so the number of tokens that you can move back and forth between you and the model is limited. And in Anthropic's case, I don't know, there's not a certain number of interactions you can have, but it's limited by the number of tokens that are moved back and forth. So if you upload a very large document, then that takes up a lot of tokens. If you're just having kind of a few sentences exchanged back and forth, you can have quite a long conversation. So I think that OpenAI especially has been very generous. Google also is very generous in the number of tokens that they give away for free relative to what it costs them to do that. So it's a It's a hard question to answer because I do think that even the free versions of these language models are incredibly helpful across a wide range of contexts. And I think a lot of people find them to be really valuable and a lot more useful than if they didn't have access to those models in the first place. Can companies do more? That's hard for me to say. Who am I to tell Google what they should and shouldn't be doing? Um, Obviously, it would be better if they could provide more tokens for more people in the free versions of their products. But no one's asking Apple to give away iPhones. There's kind of this weird thing where a company that sells hardware would never be expected to give away their hardware for free, but OpenAI drops $100 million investing in GPT-4, and people are saying, well, you should be making this available to us for nothing, which does seem like an odd thing to ask. I think that the fact that they've used publicly available data from all of mankind, all society, to build that model, I think that they do have a responsibility to provide services back to communities. But you could argue that they are providing those services on a very limited scale, but they are making it available for free to many people. So I don't have any solutions. I think you're right. I think these definitely are problems that we need to address. The economic model of generative AI isn't going to hold out for that much longer, especially when the next versions of these models come online. GPT-5 is, astronomically expensive to train, and so when that becomes available, do they up their monthly tier to $50, $100? Like, at what point does it become unsustainable?
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what the solutions are, but these are important problems that we are going to have to figure out.
Yeah. So just like one more question. We talked a lot about education, but like a significant number of people are practicing currently, and they are outside formal education. So, what areas do you advise those people in the physiotherapy practice that are in the age of AI working right now? How should they upscale? Because I can feel like 2 years ago there was a state of overwhelm. Like AI was all over the place, and like, what should I know about AI and what should I not know? Because like clearly it's a huge thing to figure out. So what areas should they focus on? I know you've released your new course. We can also talk about that. But like a general guidance, where should they go and learn more about like where the future will be like?
I think really just experimenting with AI and seeing what it's capable of in your context. So asking it lots of questions, asking it to explain things to you. There's a heuristic that I suggest to people where I tell them, if you are interacting with generative AI, you should think about it as another person. Don't think about it as a calculator or an email client like we'd normally think of software. Think of it as a person. And how would you interact with it if it were a research assistant or a personal assistant? So the heuristic that I suggest to people is roll, goal, instruct, discuss. And this isn't mine. There's loads of different versions of these kinds of prompting frameworks, but this is just one that I find especially useful and easy to remember. And so you say to the AI, you are A, so you give it a role. You say, I am A, so you explain what your role is. You give it a goal. The purpose of this interaction is for us to build this or to create this or to generate this. You give it a series of instructions. I want you to do this. Then I want you to do this. I want you to do this. And it's very useful to say, I want you to think carefully, step by step. That actually helps it to be more rational in its responses. And then to discuss. So don't take the response that it gives you on the first try as the answer. Say, I like what you said in this paragraph, but I don't agree with what you said in paragraph 3. Let's have another go at that. Try again. I want you to think about it in this context. What happens if we do this? Let's change your role now to be something different. How would you treat this conversation in a different way? So think of it as a conversation partner, a thinking partner, and just do that. And I think that the more you push it, if you can get to the point where you're thinking, I wonder if, that's a really good place to be, because then you'll experiment in lots of different ways. You'll try different things. And I think you'll be very surprised at the kinds of responses that you get from the language models. When it comes to using it in clinical practice, I would never upload any kind of personally identifiable information. And language models are very good at identifying things that you thought you had anonymized.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't include, strip out everything if you're ever thinking of uploading anything to a language model. I would definitely check the terms of service of all of these companies. So at the moment, Anthropic's terms of service don't allow them to take any of the materials that you upload to Claude and use that in future training runs. So you could upload, well, I was going to say you could upload patient information. Don't. Um,
Mhm.
but if you did upload something that was sensitive, that information won't be included in the next training run of their next language model. So you really should be aware of what the terms of service of these companies allow them to do and take that into account when you're using them.
Yeah, ChatGPT
Um,
explicitly says this interaction will be used in future trainings.
Yes. Yeah. So I think that there might be an option in ChatGPT to turn it off, but I haven't looked into that. Um, but yes, the default is that they can take that information. It's not saying that they will, but they can take that information and use it to train future models. Um, and so one of the things that I tell people most often is don't use generative AI to generate answers, ask it to generate ideas. So I have a patient with anterior knee pain. I've tried A, B, and C. I can't find the source of the knee pain. Give me 5 other ideas for things that I might not have thought about. That's got nothing to do with a specific patient. It's not, you're not going to run into any concerns around GDPR or other data and privacy issues. All that is a generic conversation, and think of it as a conversation with one of your peers on the ward. So, I'm having a patient with this problem and I can't figure out what the issue is. Give me some ideas. It's really, really good for those kinds of conversations. And then there's just administrative tasks. Um, I think we will eventually get to the point where these language models will be running locally on your computer and they won't send any information anywhere, and you will just give it access to all of your patient records. And you say, give me a referral for this patient to this doctor, give me a discharge letter for this patient. And it will read through all the notes about that patient and write a discharge letter that's context specific for that patient. Now, again, this isn't possible at the moment, but at some point we'll have language models that are private that run on your machine, and you won't have any concerns about giving it access to your information because you will be in total control of that model. So yeah, those are just some ideas where people might want to start thinking about using generative AI in their practice.
Yeah, that's great. So I don't want to keep you any longer. We already passed the time that you should go. First, thank you so much. It was a great conversation. Maybe we should try like soon, like have a part two of what we touched on today. I'll add in the notes your new course on AI. And I also have free email course if anyone wants to like as an introduction to AI, to like have somewhere to have all those ideas collected. I'll link to that as well. Thank you again, Dr. Michael. It was a great conversation.
It was my pleasure, and thank you so much for asking me. I really appreciated the conversation.